What are some things that you think the Baltimore Ravens need to address this offseason moving forward?
Well, let's preview this with the Ravens have a pretty solid team put together on the defensive side of the ball, right? You lost Marcus Williams at the beginning of the year, earlier on in the year. You have Marcus Peters. You obviously have Marlon Humphrey. You have Patrick Queen. You've signed Roquan Smith. You had a decent pass rush this year. So, like, the defense is something I'm not really focused on. This is going to be obviously common sense for everybody in the football world. Your primary focus needs to be extending Lamar Jackson full term, long term, whatever analogy you want to use, whether that's tagging him and handling it next year. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to play on the tag, but you have to get him committed every single time the Ravens start hot. This is also the negative to it. Lamar gets hurt and the Ravens plummet. But it goes to show the value of him excels that through the injury, because it's like when he's not available, the Ravens just don't play well. Again, the defense played good, but without Lamar Jackson, the offense struggled. So I would say top priority, got to re-sign Lamar. Second priority, bolster up that offensive line just a little bit more. Make sure that he is protected in all aspects. And I know that it's very hard to protect a mobile quarterback such as himself of that caliber, but I would say that, boosting up that offensive line, and then it's got to be wide receivers. We've been saying this for years. Lamar Jackson has not had a definitive target in his career outside of Hollywood Brown and Mark Andrews. He's got nobody. Devin Duvernay and a list of other receivers that I'm not going to waste my time naming. Get Lamar some help. He cannot continue to do this all by himself. He cannot continue to extend plays and escape pressure for 30 yards a clip in terms of how many yards he runs per play, trying to avoid pressure and make plays with his feet and extend plays with his feet. You have to get Lamar Jackson some help with some weapons. I'm not talking about a vertical deep threat. I'm not talking about a dual threat running back that can catch out of the backfield and also run downhill. I'm talking about a definitive number one receiver, whether that's in the draft or in this upcoming free agency class. But the bottom line is every aspect of that offense needs to be upgraded. Again, you got to upgrade by just signing Lamar long term. You got to get a receiver, if not two. And then, of course, you got to make sure that Lamar stays healthy, solidify the offensive line. You can make a fourth point and argue that, they need some running back depth too, because J.K. was hurt. You had to go in and bring Kenyon Drake. They haven't really had the best luck with healthy running backs over the last couple of years, as everybody knows. But I would say focalize on the first three that I said. Lamar, line, wide receiver. You may even make the argument that wide receiver probably has to be a little bit more important since the Ravens' offensive line isn't horrible. But again, for the sake of what we're talking about, you got to talk about you got to extend Lamar long term. Got to get some receivers and load up that offensive line.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you. Pretty much everything you just laid out is pretty much what I was gonna go over. Uh, I want to focus on the wide receiving core here because Kev, this is abysmal. I mean, granted, there are some guys that can produce. I'm not going to disrespect them that way, but to say that the guys that I'm going to list off here are number one targets that Lamar Jackson is throwing to, bro, this is ridiculous. Let me dive into this list here real quick. I know that you mentioned Duvernay. Let's dive into this a little bit more, just so everybody understands. I'm looking at their depth chart right now. Their number one option at the wide receiving core is Demarcus Robinson. Demarcus Robinson, if you go back to his KC days, which was just literally a year ago, Kev, he was like the fourth option on the team in their wide receiving core. I mean, obviously, back then, you had guys like Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. I think even McCole Hardman was ahead of him. Hell, even Byron Pringle may have been ahead of Demarcus Robinson. So the fact that he's the number one option that the Ravens had at their disposal this year, that's not a good sign. But let's keep going. Number two, Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins had a little bit of a resurgence back when he was with KC. Not going to lie about that. But it's been a couple years since that. And Sammy just hasn't been able to produce at a good enough clip to be a valuable number one or even a number two wide receiver compared to some other wide receiving cores in the NFL. I'll go to the third guy that they have on the top of the depth chart here. James Prochet II. To be quite honest with you, I don't really know much about James Prochet. After that, you got Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, and Andy Isabella. This is the cast of guys that Lamar had at his disposal this year before he got hurt. And I could tell it's not going to be enough. Now, granted, you have Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews, solid tight end. But I think even this year, he did not produce at the clip that we've seen him produce the last couple of years. And it's pretty simple. I think opposing defenses just know, okay, we'll basically put Mark Andrews in a bind. If we get him in a situation where we double team him, Lamar's going to have to either run out of the pocket, make some plays on his feet, or he's going to have to throw to guys like Demarcus Robinson, Sammy Watkins, and James Prochet II. That to me is not a winning formula. So obviously the biggest thing to me is they have to upgrade the wide receiving core. And they have to get a legitimate number one receiver. And I mean a legitimate number one. And they're going to have to find it either in free agency or they're going to have to trade for somebody because you're not going to find it in the draft. Outside of that, the other big thing with them is the status of Lamar Jackson. Is Lamar Jackson going to be the future quarterback of the Ravens right now? And honestly, I can't say that. Kevin and I were looking at reports before we started recording. Apparently, the gap in the contract negotiations with the dollar amount is as wide of $100 million between what Lamar Jackson's camp wants and what the Ravens are potentially putting on the table. If that is the case, because that number is quite large. If it was like 20 million, maybe that's something that they can iron out. But if it's 100 million, I don't see how this can be rectified moving forward. More than likely, the Ravens are going to have to settle with franchise tagging him. And I know Lamar doesn't want that. I know Lamar wants a contract very similar to what Deshaun Watson just got with Cleveland, where he got his contract fully guaranteed. I can tell you right now, that is not happening. Lamar Jackson has not been playing up to that same level that he displayed in his MVP campaign just a couple years ago. And the other thing is, Lamar's been hurt. The injury history here is something that, unfortunately, Lamar faced. And unfortunately, the Ravens are probably going to use that against him in contract negotiations. That's the business side of things. So, to me, most of the issues that I see with the Ravens going into this offseason are on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, I think they're more stable there as a unit, but the offense, it needs to be completely retooled. And unless the Ravens go out there and make some big moves this offseason to bring in a better cast of targets to throw to for Lamar Jackson, I think the Ravens are going to be a competitive team, but I don't think they're going to really threaten for an AFC championship or a Super Bowl next year. To me, Lamar Jackson is a huge piece moving forward, but if they do not bolster up this wide receiving core, this team will go nowhere, and they will finish very similar to what they had this past season. They will probably make a wild card. If they're lucky, they may advance, but they'll more than likely get knocked out in the divisional round. And to me, it really comes down to Lamar Jackson. If they don't sign Lamar Jackson and he ends up going somewhere else, or if they just franchise tag him, you're not really solving the issue. You're just kicking the can down the road. And if they completely move on from Lamar Jackson, it's pretty much a rebuild as far as I see it. So the Ravens got a lot to work on this offseason, and it's going to be a bumpy road as far as I see it.